Hey, you guys. I am live on the Periscope, and 1 second I'll be live on Facebook Live as well. So you guys, this is a live evening production and interview with the candidate for 4th Ward Alderman, Gregory Livingston. We always talk about entrepreneurship, and connected with entrepreneurship, we always talk about service and our commitment to the community. So today we're going to be talking about just that. This is the official interview with Gregory Livingston. We had the opportunity to interview a couple days ago, and now we wanted to come back with an official, formatted, and formal interview. We will not be taking questions from you guys today as we did last time because the platform doesn't allow for that. We're scoping and broadcasting from so many devices that we're not able to field questions into the conversation from you guys. But nevertheless, we would still like for you to post those questions because we will be getting answers for those questions to you guys, just not during this interview. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll take this opportunity to introduce myself to you guys before allowing the candidate to introduce himself. My name is Andrea Thompson. I scope about all things relative to money, motivation, and mindset. I am the executive director of the POW Biz Movement, you guys, the entrepreneurial conference that will be returning to Chicago May 19th through the 21st. I'm super excited about the expansion of this conference from a one-day event to a 3-day event. I am also the co-founder of the Dream Deferred campaign, an educational nonprofit that seeks to build communities through education and entrepreneurship. In alignment with that mission, I want to speak with the alderman about just that, education, the youth, as well as the violence in Chicago, and how does he seek to remedy that, specifically in Bronzeville in the 4th Ward. So I'll go ahead and get to his introduction, and we'll go ahead and get the formal interview started. Once again, thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us for this very important broadcast. So Mr. Livingston, thank you so much for joining us and talking about these very important issues. Before we get into the discussion regarding these issues, let me just take the opportunity to have you to introduce yourself to the constituents and to our viewership here today.
Thank you, Andrea. Andrea, the super entrepreneur. I am so impressed with this young lady and the folk that you can't see. It just makes me feel so good about not just the future, but right now. So thank you for all that you do, and just be encouraged that no matter what mountains you have to climb, you can climb them, go through them, go around them. But I know one thing, you're going to get to the other side. So you're doing an awesome job. Thank you. My name is Gregory Livingston. I'm a native Chicagoan. I am the president of the Coalition for New Chicago, running for alderman here in the 4th Ward here in Chicago. It is a special election taking place February 28th, a little over 50 days away, because we're filling out the remaining 2 years of the former alderman's term, Will Burns. So we've been very active here in the city, in the country, really around the world, because my basic ideology or philosophy about life is that I don't want to see anyone suffer. And anything that I can do, or any coalition I can build to help alleviate human suffering and allow people to live better and fuller lives, that's what we want to do. So when Will Burns announced that he was resigning in March of 2016, some friends of mine, they talked to me, they said, listen, why don't you run for that position? You've always pushed from the outside in, why not do it from the inside out? So we talked about it, we thought about it, and we prayed about it and everything. We said, okay, let's do this. And the reason that it's such a serious endeavor is that, you know, the 4th Ward is the great bridge war between the haves and the have-nots. And so you have the greatest diversity here between the wealth and poverty. So what you're looking at with all this valuable land, it was remapped in 2012. The boundaries are from 55th to Jackson Boulevard downtown over to Printers Row, and it goes as far west as Michigan Avenue over to the lake. And this land has always been valued. Bronzeville has always been a gem for Black Chicago and anyone else that wanted to enjoy the Bronzeville experience. But the way things are happening right now, the way things seem to be going down, the 4th Warders have a tradition of independence. And so we need to be able to stand up in the city council here in Chicago and say, look, let me hear what my residents, my constituents have to say about what we're planning to do, because in Chicago, every dollar that goes into Chicago or that comes out of Chicago must go through city council. That's the mayor and the alderman. So make no mistake about it. Don't try to reduce it to something that it is not or anything else, is that the aldermanic seat here in Chicago is powerful. Mm-hmm. We have 50 aldermen. And so to have that seat and to not to do the right thing with it, that's an insult to humanity, if I can be that extreme in my description.
Absolutely. I always talk about how as individuals we have a stake in the interest of our community. We have a stake in the youth empowerment. And I know that in this role as alderman, you definitely have even a greater stake in the community. And so thank you for being transparent about what that means to hold such a position of power. And we're going to go ahead and segue off of that and talk about the Bronzeville experience. You talked a lot about the richness of this historic community and the businesses that we've had along 47th Street with the Black Wall Street and the return of that with Brother Mark Allen. So I really want to start off by talking about Bronzeville as an experience, as a community that many others model themselves after. I kind of want to look at the history of it when it was in its better days, its prime, so to speak, and how we bring it back to that, being the economic hub for the community constituents here.
Let me start off this way, Andrea. My brother, Cornel West made this statement. He said, African rhythms on European instruments is called jazz. When you bring those two things together, you get this kind of sound, this kind of rhythm. And so when blacks migrated from the South, the great Southland, they come to Chicago and they begin to take root in these places. Why? Because it's near work, manufacturing plants, Spiegel, companies like that. So they come here in a particular environment, but they bring all of this great power of the Southland with them. And it comes together, the South and the North, the rural and the urban come together in Chicago in a place we call Bronzeville. It creates something unique, not just in music, but in business, religion, education. Something unique was created and very special. And it is not something that is limited by time. That's why we have to make sure that we continue to nourish it and to nurture it so that generations beyond us will be able to experience it and to be filled up by it, in their lives as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of nourishing it, I've talked to a number of community constituents who are in the art industry with regard to the many galleries that we now have in Bronzeville. We have Fayet's Art Gallery here on 43rd. We have Gallery Bouchard on 47th, as well as Little Black Pearl on 47th. And so can you just kind of speak to the art district that's here in Bronzeville and the art tour that we have in the summertime? How can we make sure that we keep these places in Bronzeville and make sure that they're accessible to our community residents, make sure they're properly funded so that they remain here in Bronzeville?
I think one of the reasons that places like that don't succeed or they die is there's an ignorance of them. And by that I mean, if you've never been exposed to the power of art, if you've never been exposed to the power of music, then it's something that you don't really pay much attention to. And so you have these great places of art here in this Bronzeville area that many people, black folk especially, don't know about. And so once you expose them to, once you say, you know what, we need to really have some focused tours with our schools to these art places, not just the Art Institute downtown,
right,
but all of these great art places here in Bronzeville as well. But it has to be a conscientious effort to do that, because if you don't really have the will to do it, if you don't see the value to do it, you're not going to do it. And so, but also, art is the language of the soul. It is the expression, and it does something to you when you see what someone else's soul has produced. Here they are, and they're just pouring out themselves from a palette and colors and textures and all these things. And I think that the more we have of that, which is why I'm really so angry in terms of why they took instruments, musical instruments out of the school, art classes and everything. It said that, this stuff shouldn't be on the budget. Whoever did that just doesn't understand what it means to be human. To remove that from the human experience is basically to eviscerate the human being themselves.
Absolutely. I'd agree with that. Arts and music definitely plays a powerful role in our school system, and so I would agree that they're definitely necessary to make sure that our students have the advantage and access to different forms of learning and forms of expressing themselves. Thank you, guys. I just want to take this moment and reset really quick. Thank you all who have just recently joined us. I see that you guys are hearting it up. You guys are swiping and sharing out on Periscope. I appreciate that. Please do retweet this broadcast. We do want to make sure that we reach as many people as possible with this broadcast, because this is a conversation about Bronzeville. This is a conversation about the Fourth Ward. But make no mistake, this is a conversation that needs to be had in many cities across the country, in many wards, in many communities that are like Bronzeville. And so let's just go ahead and segue into poverty reduction. I know that when we last interviewed on our unofficial platform, we had some questions with regard to your plans to help people who are battling homelessness, resources, and the provision of various resources or allocation of those resources that would be helpful to your ward constituents. So how do you intend on addressing issues relative to homelessness as well as poverty reduction?
I think the first thing we have to do is show people how important it is to address them. You know, a friend of mine, Dr. David Goldberg, a physician down at Stroger Hospital, County Hospital, concerned with public health and everything else, he did a study where he took the target ages between 16 and 64, and he split the city up north side, south side, and he had whites on the north side, 16 to 64, blacks on the south side, 16 to 64. And what his study found is this, is that white women, 8 out of 10, I believe, lived beyond the age of 64. It was like 7 out of 10 white men lived beyond the age of 64. On the south side, black women, 4 out of 10 lived beyond the age of 64, and 1 out of 2 black men lived beyond the age of 64. And so when he did the study, he's an expert. He's at the county. He's a public health guy and all that. It wasn't about genetics or anything being hereditary. Now, there are triggers that can exacerbate some things, but what he found was that there were these deserts. There were health deserts, employment deserts, school deserts, just every kind of desert you can imagine that basically made life inhumane. Even did a thing that, I forget the street it was, it might have been Northern Avenue. You crossed it, and there were 140 libraries versus 0 south of that street, okay, in terms of public libraries. So when human beings have been raped and robbed of resources, even here there was a study that I read that said that if you live east of Cottage Grove, you live 20 years longer than if you live west of Cottage Grove. And again, it's not about genetics, though there are triggers that can be exacerbated, but it is about resources. So now what we have to do in terms of poverty reduction just as an economic, it's life or death. Because when you impoverish the human being, you create a situation where this human being is can't survive, or they have to then begin to seek other ways. Impoverished people, they find or they develop alternative/illegitimate economies. Because if I am not allowed to participate in a legitimate economy, but I have the same human urges, wants, and needs. I want to buy my loved one something. I want to live in a house. I want food in the refrigerator. I want to buy clothes. I mean, all that is natural and good.
Absolutely.
But if you don't have the ability to participate in a legitimate economy, you find other ways to do it. And that opens doors. You talk about, why do we have all this crime? We have all this crime, and I have to say this, that sociologically speaking, every community in America that has come here has had their gangsters, their gangbangers. I mean, St. Valentine's Day Massacre with the mafia, the Italians doing that, is one of the greatest massacres in Chicago in American history. So don't just think that it's a melanin problem. It ain't just a color problem. It is about oppression, overcoming oppression. But what makes it different for black Americans is the melanin aspect, because black is a socio-political construct that is only partially genetic. You see, so therefore, you can look white and say you're black, but you can't look black and say you're white. That's because it's a construct, and the powers are the ones who decide what fits into the construct. And so anyway, so they're getting off of that. But so in order to reduce this poverty, there are so many things that we have to dismantle, disassemble, and then build. But it takes courage.
It does.
I ain't gonna lie, it takes courage. Because you can't be no punk out here and fight these forces and think they're just gonna back down. Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand.
Absolutely. I strongly agree with that, and I definitely want to piggyback off of that conversation. You brought up some very, very major points, and so I just want to cover a few of those, because we started off talking about poverty, but you see how the conversation actually spiraled into a number of issues. And I've realized in my research studies as an academic student, as a law student, I've realized that poverty reduction entails so many other aspects of so many other different problems that inflict our people and that plague our community, essentially. So access to health care, access to mental health services, education, things like this actually contribute to poverty. And so if we deal with those things, we can also address poverty. And so I'll go ahead and move on to my next question with you, which is regarding your neighboring aldermen, because I know that the issues that we have here in Bronzeville are also issues that they're having in the second ward, that they're having in the third ward, and being that your ward is connected so closely to these other neighboring wards, can you just give us a little bit of an indication of how you've collaborated with those aldermen, or how you intend to do any special projects or initiatives with them, so that you can make sure that there's a holistic healing or a holistic improvement of the community in alignment with the people that you're collaborating with?
You know, one of my mentors went and visited Fidel Castro, and when he was there with Castro, Castro talked to him about the Batista Revolution in 1959. And Castro said what we understood was that we could, you know, he took him around the islands, and it was these incredible places that we had never seen on Western media. And he said, how did you do all this? He says, well, we understood that in 59, after the revolution, that we could not remain revolutionaries and become nation builders. We had to change roles in order to do that. It's kind of like you're a farmer, but you got to become a cook to make good of what you just grew, right? And so, I mean, you can't be a farmer in the kitchen, you know, you have to be a cook in the kitchen. And so he says, so what I did is that I got the brightest minds on the island, and I put them all in a room, and I said, you guys figure out how we can become a nation and meet the needs of these people. He says, then I put armed guards on the door and said, kill anybody that leaves, you know. And so, in other words, we have the same thing, but what we have to do is to put figurative armed guards on the door. What I mean by that is you gotta have people that care enough about other people to make a difference. So you talked to me about my collar wars, the other aldermen. You know, you can't get fed unless you're at the table. There's only one table, and if there's a terminal resource that table has, how do you get that and divvy it up among everybody in a fair and, let's say, egalitarian way? Well, one of the problems that we tend to have is that we just had a budget passed, and it was passed in City Council 48-0. Well, there are things about that budget that a lot of citizens don't like, but it was never discussed with them. And part of the problem here in Chicago is that in Chicago, we don't do politics, we do politricks. and remember, it's only about one thing always. It's about the money. It's about the people that have contracts, the strings tied to individuals. It's always about the money. No, don't let anybody fool you that it's about anything more or less. It's about the money. And so when individuals vote and there's no discussion about the issues being voted on with the people who are paying for all this, because taxes went up for everybody with that particular vote, and we're not saying that they may not have been necessary to raise some taxes, but why don't you talk to me about it first? Let me know, because I put you in office to represent me and to let me know what's happening. And so this has been going on too long in Chicago. Now, my collar alderman, you know, two wonderful people, Pat Dow, Leslie Hairston, you know, there's another guy down in two, new guy, Brian Hopkins, I don't know much about him. And I think, you know, I've worked with Pat when we fed people in Haiti. I worked with Leslie Hairston in trying to get a more rigorous kind of civilian police overview board. And I've watched both of them fight and try to make things happen in the fight that they have. And you really got to have skin in the game. You can't be afraid to die, quote unquote, if you will. And you gotta have some balls, man. You gotta have some sack.
Some heart.
Well, no.
For
Heart.
the ladies.
No, heart. No, ladies to have balls too. You know. No, really. I mean, my wife has mine right now. You know? So, yeah.
This interview has taken a turn. Let me bring it on right back. So, you guys, we're going to go ahead and go into dividing resources in a fair manner. That was definitely something that I could springboard a question off of.
You're not
dividing
gonna edit that out,
resources
are
in a
you?
fair manner. No, I'm not going to edit that out because we're actually live. So you have heard the candidate discuss balls and heart here live.
Well, I'm better than Trump.
Right, exactly.
I didn't say we got to grab something now. I didn't do that. See, there you go.
That's true. See, Trump has an unfair advantage, though, that you may not have, so I don't know.
He does have an advantage.
He still got an office, even though he said that.
Yeah, you know, because he told the truth.
I think he did. I'm not going to talk about Trump, you guys, because you know I get emotional when I talk about Trump. I'm not a fan of Trump, but some of my supporters and my mentors are, so I respect them in their standpoint. But we're going to move on to a man that I like much more than Trump, which is the candidate that we have here. So let's go ahead and talk about dividing resources in a fair manner. Let's talk about these TIFs. What are TIFs and how do they govern how we do business in the ward, and how are they fairly allocated among the businesses that are here, as well as serving as incentives to businesses that are going to be coming into the ward?
TIF is an acronym that stands for Tax Incremental Financing. And TIFs were set up, to take property taxes and to freeze them for a period of about 23 years. In 2016 we started off with 147 active TIFs, coming to about $1.3 billion. Now, in Chicago, the mayor has total control over TIF money. Now, when you talk about TIFs and about fairly dividing this money, what you have to ask yourself is, and really understand, is this: using public funds for public needs, okay. Using public funds for private needs, that's where the problem comes in, okay? I mean, say for instance here in Hyde Park, in the 4th Ward, Hyde Park, the Hyatt Hotel there on 53rd and Lake Park. Wonderful place, no problems, I mean, it brings in money, tourists, all this, but, it got $5 million, about $6 million in TIF funds. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is you're using public funds for a private entity. And the reason it's a problem, Hyatt is owned by the Pritzkers. The Pritzkers are multi-billionaires. Why did they need $5 million of the taxpayers' money in order to build a hotel that was going to make money regardless? The second question becomes, who is the one that is making the plans on how to spend the TIFs? So could that $5 million have been used in a school, a recreation area, some kind of mental health care service or whatever it might be? Yes, it could have. It didn't have to go to that kind of that destination, the hotel. And so when you talk about this kind of money, another situation, Mayor Emanuel, CPS, they were struggling, so he gave them $81 million out of the TIF fund. Thank you, But by the same token, his friend Larry Levy, a developer, he gives him $47 million out of the TIF fund. So you have this money that is there that could do so much good, but it is at the discretion of someone who has different values in many ways than the taxpayers who are paying into this. So if you want to, for instance, if you and I had a business and you sold pizzas and I had sold pizzas, we're across the street from each other. Your pizza is great. My pizza is great, but yours is even better. So then all of a sudden, you get smart. You say, I'm gonna start selling 2 for 1. Because by volume, and your pizza is so great, and then I go to my friend in City Hall and say, look, I can't keep up, I need some more money. So he says, I'm gonna give you some of her property tax money so you can compete. No. That's not capitalism. Capitalism says, compete. And if your business or product is not good enough, then you have lost. You know what I mean? It's like, I can't go out there on a football field and say, okay, it ain't fair for us to play y'all. Y'all got better players. So instead, we get 5 yards for a first down, and y'all get 10 yards for a first down. You know what that would make football then? Golf. But some people know what I'm talking about. But so when the TIF funds are used, in my opinion, inappropriately like that, it creates a real problem. But the aldermen know. Yeah. And so then where's the discussion with their constituents, with the ward people? Says, look, this is your money. And then the other thing, TIF funds can touch TIF funds. So your TIF funds, your property taxes that were here in your ward can be used in other places. And because so often those who are on the outside, those who are the forgotten, those who are least valued don't have the time because of work and frustration and stress to delve into all this. The money they're paying out is going somewhere else, and someone else is benefiting from it. And because they don't have proper representation, they don't know. Again, it takes courage to stand up to a cabal. Harold Washington said, to these scurrilous minions, you see. And so, and that's really part of the problem here, Andrea, is that we know what to do. We just have to have the courage to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it does take courage, you guys. So while we're talking about fairness and while we're talking about the allocation of resources within the ward, and we talked about the Pritzkers, I think that's a perfect segue into talking about the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago is, you know, a great school, and they reside here in our community. There is no trauma center, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about with relation to the University of Chicago. And so can you just kind of talk about the need for a trauma center at University of Chicago, where you stand on that, and what type of relationship do you foresee having with the University of Chicago so that they can open some of the resources that they have within the higher learning institution that will be available maybe to some of the ward constituents and community residents?
Sure thing. You've been out of town. So they have agreed to a trauma center piece.
Okay, thank you for updating me on that.
Yeah, sure, that's not a problem. Before that, though, they were the dispatch center for all the traumas, but they would not allow certain individuals or class of individuals to use their services. So say, for instance, your child was having an asthma attack, and so you need, you have a time frame where you have to get this child into that emergency room. Well, then you had to bypass them and go like to Holy Cross on California or something like that. And one of the problems is, or go out to Christ in Oak Lawn, that if your child has an asthma attack or you get cut or shot or whatever it might be, and it's 5 o'clock in Chicago, and the ambulance has to first come pick you up, and then it has to drive you way out to Oak Lawn, guess what? You're gonna die, right? And see, and there are numbers, and I used to have them in my head, forgive me, about the number of people that die that don't make it to the trauma center, don't make it to the emergency center. And then there are other places where there's health care all around, I mean, think about this. Just as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, there were no warming centers on the south side of Chicago. What that meant is in the wintertime, we used to do this, that when the libraries were closed, we would go and pick the people up and bring them back to church so they could sleep in the church at night, because many of them would not go to the police station because they were afraid they would be locked up. And so then, you have people there. I mean, I've seen it over and over again, frostbitten and stuff. We drop people off at the emergency room in Roseland, things like that. There they are. They're out there with their feet exposed. And sometimes people say, oh, they can do better than that. But I would always say to people, Andrea, unless you've walked a moment in their shoes, you don't know what they've been through, what battles they've had to fight. But what's most important, you see they need help, don't ask no questions, just help them. So the U of C, going from the trauma center to, let's say, the U of C as a whole, is the great elephant in the room. There are billions of dollars that pass through the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago is an incredibly powerful institution. But I believe there is a way that we can have a win-win-win. You see, all of the money, the revenue that is generated and the mental capital, intellectual capital, know-how capital that is generated on that campus, there is a way that we can build coalitions and networks where everybody can benefit. But what has to be shown sometimes to people that that have no knowledge of individuals who have not had their privilege or advantage is the tremendous value. You know what it's like, if I can use this as an analogy? It's like a guy, and I'm going to be pretty blunt, that grew up playing basketball in a real nice suburb, and they had courts. There was never any glass on the court, no rocks, nobody shooting, no rims bent from dunking. None of that stuff. And just been all the balls, they were properly inflated. They had all the latest Jordans, but they got LeBrons now too.
Possibly.
Okay.
He should have.
But I think Jordan still is the best seller, and everything. And nobody's shooting them to get their Jordans and stuff. Just playing ball, man. Just playing basketball. Then you got some kid over on, let's use the west side. You know what I'm saying? Off the boulevard, shooting ball in the alley somewhere. On some court that got glass on it. The backboard is messed up with
a crate
like James Naismith, right? You know what I mean? An orange basket, a fruit basket, peach basket, and doing all that. And then developing skills because of the environment and circumstances that the other kid would never. Because you ain't got Maurice Cheeks grew up in the Robert Taylor Holmes Hall of Famer. He said we used to play on glass. Everything else, you just learn how to maneuver. That's why I'm so quick, and everything. And so there is value in the experience of the advantaged, and there is value in the experience of the disadvantaged. And once people come to understand that, or you persuade or convince them or show them, then it's like the Negro baseball leagues. Whenever they played the Major League All-Stars, they destroyed them every time. You know, Hall of Famers in the Major League Baseball, and then the Negro League players. But I'm telling you, the crucible of suffering brings about a great strength. And once we understand that that is not a bad thing, then I think we'll all be better off. If I can address you, I hope I addressed your question.
You did, absolutely. And I really, really resonate with the statement that you just made about value in the spirit of the disadvantaged. I think oftentimes when people make it to a certain level of success, they just want to talk about that success and they don't want to talk about the story of where they came from. And I think that this is very important, that we realize that there are some people who are depending on us to tell the transparent and naked truth about who we are, where we come from, our struggles, and what we've overcome to become successful. And so I definitely think that there is value in the spirit of the disadvantaged. And so since we've talked about University of Chicago and the trauma center that you just informed me is going to be coming to the University of Chicago, let's go ahead and talk about healing and the Dream Center that is opened at Morning Star Church with Pastor Chris Harris. And let's just talk about it in the context of our ward needing healing. We've had a number of deaths, particularly our youth. Hadia Pendleton just across the street, who was one of my younger sister's friends. And we've had a number of other people that have been lost to violence here in the community. A lot of people who I know, who my family know, and I know that moms are deeply affected by the loss of their children. And so there's a lot of healing that needs to take place in our community as a response to this. And so how would you say that we start to counter some of the violence that we're seeing, some of the rises in violence that we're seeing, particularly with our youth? How do we counter that? Where do we even start?
You know, I was on staff at DePaul University, let's say like around 2001. And I remember when the whole thing about molestation in the Catholic Church broke out. Mm-hmm. So DePaul is a private Catholic school. And, you know, I'm Protestant, you know, and I had all of these students that wanted to come and talk with me. You know, my appointments were backed up like 2 or 3 weeks. And so they were going to have a special service, and there were individuals talking about how they had suffered at the hands, you know, of a priest or something and all that, and I had people talking to me. And I listened to it, and I took it very seriously. And so when they came to say, what can we do and everything, I had to be very honest. And when I say be very honest, you know, some people, you know, they may misunderstand you, but, you know, the cost of being misunderstood to me is cheap compared to trying to help someone.
Absolutely.
And so I said, you know, I'm the only black person here. You know, my parents are from the South. My paternal grandfather was born in 1883. My paternal grandmother was born in 1896. And, you know, I had my grandfather's brother, Teddy, was burned alive, chained to a tree because of an accusation from a white woman and all that. You know, I said, I got a lot of stories, you know, from these older people in me. I said, and one of the stories is that what did the black woman do in slavery when she was raped by the master? And her husband and children would be put out of the shack, you know, so to speak, and that would happen. Well, after the rape occurred, they were let back in. She couldn't take a day off from the fields. She couldn't go anywhere for therapy. There was no one to call a help hotline. How did this woman find the strength to go through that and to be so strong? How does she do that? And what I was saying to them is that, you know, there is a way to do this, but you got to look at the whole picture, if you will. And so then what I, you know, in talking about that, I said, look, the African that was brought to these shores was beaten into slavery. These were not slaves that were delivered. They were African persons who were beaten into slavery. And as people of African descent, we have experienced violence from the very first moment, if we use 1619, that we've been on these shores. Absolutely. That is not an indictment of melanin content. That is talking about the economics of the slave trade. That's money again, right? The economics of the slave trade. And so what did we do as a people? And some people may say we didn't do anything because we talked about post-traumatic stress syndrome before. But what is it that we were able to do to deal with this constant cultural violence? Because it was culturally acceptable to be violent toward a black person. It was culturally acceptable, whether it be rape, beatings, lynchings, castrations. It was culturally acceptable. It was legal, right? And so then you look at that, you say, okay, you know, what we have to do, Frederick Douglass said, there is no shame in being a slave. The only shame is in being a slave owner. And so what these black folk, you know, our ancestors, for many of us, did, is that they understood the power of the mind. And they understood about the narrative and changing the narrative. There is something called the Negro spiritual. We talk about rap. Snoop Dogg said, rap ain't nothing but a mirror of reality. Well, the Negro spiritual was not a mirror of their reality. It was not a denial of it, but it was saying a transcending of it. You see, in order to become more, I got to think more, do more. And not trying to give any kind of clinic here, if you will, but what I'm saying is that who we are as black people is so rich, it is so powerful, and we don't need anybody to psych us out about our history and be ashamed to say black, be ashamed to say brown. No, it is what it is, you know, it is what it is. But when we begin to look and to understand that, because if you are sick, any good doctor is going to want to know your medical history. Well, in order to understand, you know, how people have suffered and dealt with violence in this country, we have to be historical. We can't skip over slavery. You know, we talk about post-traumatic syndrome situations and war situations and veterans. Ain't got nothing but love and respect. But there are a people in this country, you know, and one of the popular things now is to talk about slavery and post-traumatic stress syndrome. I just call it collective grief. That it is grief over all the things that have been done that we have not been able to acknowledge or properly deal with. And so to get back with specificity to your point, in terms of the suffering, the violence that people have hit out here, first thing I would say is remember, you know what, you're not by yourself. And there are others who have been through this, and you can make it too. And as a person who has experienced, you know, for me, extraordinary grief and things of that nature, when I thought I would never get out of it, I was in a hole, I'd never get out. I thank God that I had friends that called me and said, hey man, you're gonna make it.
Absolutely.
You know, and sometimes I think we try to overcomplicate it, but sometimes you just need a good friend to say, come on, you can do it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I'd agree with that. I want to take some time to talk about that as well. I've been very involved in matters relative to bringing peace in our community, organizations like Ceasefire and other initiatives that have tried to bring about peace, that have tried to do conflict resolution with some of our youth. And so I want to speak to that really quickly. One of the things that stood out to me and things that I've noticed throughout the ward, I remember one time I was on 47th near the shoe shining place, by 47th in Michigan, actually. And the owner was having some work done by some contractors, and they were Hispanic. And the man said to me, what is this? It was a memorial set up for a gunshot victim with the flowers, the balloons, and the poster boards. And he said, what is this? And I said, it's a memorial. Someone has been shot here. Someone has died here, and it's a memorial that's set up to pay tribute to them. And I remember his response, and he was like, so do you celebrate the gunshots? Are you celebrating the fact that someone's, you know, what are you celebrating with the balloons? He just couldn't conceptually understand why this memorial was being set up. And I said, well, because somebody's being lost and you want to pay homage to their life, you want to celebrate their life. And so it's just to say that something happened here and it means something to the community. And he thought it was very interesting, and he started to ask me more questions. And I thought about that, how we always put up these memorials and we make these t-shirts with the victim's face on it. And I became very frustrated with that, because I actually saw my brothers attend funerals every other month for 2 consecutive years of friends that they lost to gun violence. And so I thought it was very disheartening that we have a tradition in our culture of putting the face on the shirt and going out with the rest in peace shirt on. And after the funeral, we're going to party. We're celebrating the life, but we're going to party. And this is something that we did at the loss of my younger brother as well to gun violence. And I realized that this is the norm. This is what we do to try to get over the grief. We bring food to the family. We come and we commune together. And so what I did as a little bit of a token to try to take us in the right direction, or in a better direction, I should say, was that I started to put my own son's picture on t-shirts for each birthday. And for me, that represented life. That represented celebrating that he's continuing to grow and continuing to flourish in this community as a future man of integrity that will do great things in this ward. And so I thought that if we started to put positive things on shirts and celebrate life rather than showing death on these t-shirts, it would really make a powerful message. And so I just want to touch on that further by saying, to move forward, we must assess our history. And so I'm really glad that you went into the depths of the trauma that we've experienced over the years and coming to who we are now. And I do want to take this opportunity because one of the things that I thought was very crucial in last year's conference, I have to get used to saying last year, you guys. And so one of the things that I thought was crucial and that I was really appreciative for was the fact that we incorporated a piece that was designed to pay tribute to moms who have been impacted by violence. One of the saddest things that I've seen is a mom grieving the loss of her child due to gun violence. And this is something that I'm really committed to helping whomever I can, whether it be a politician, whether it be a community organizer, an activist, or a ward constituent, whomever it is who says, this is something that affects me, this is something that's happening in my backyard. I want to be proactive in making sure that we're taking actionable and steps towards seeing some results and some significant change. And so I would just take this opportunity to say that if you have a young person who you know is troubled, who you know is getting into trouble, then rather than treating them like the outsider, rather than thinking that they're the bad child and you're staying clear of them, I would ask that you take some time to talk to them about their challenges, talk to them about their experience, because a lot of them are angry because of their environment. A lot of them are dealing with issues within their home that reflects negatively in how they present themselves in public. And so I would encourage you to embrace them rather than reject them. And so we'll go ahead and move into what I believe will be my final question. But sometimes our conversations go longer than we anticipate because we have so much to talk about. So I think this will be my final question, but don't hold me to it. I might come up with another one. So let's go ahead and scoot on over to talking about education in our schools and our ward. What do you think is a critical issue that we face with regarding the effort to make sure that our children have access to quality education and making sure that they're positioned to succeed and that they do not have a delay, but rather have the same advantages that other kids have in other wards? What are you prepared to do to kind of make sure that our schools reflect what we want to have in our community for our future generations?
I think that every child deserves the right to be able to walk from their homes to a high quality school.
Absolutely.
Now, if you want to create a special school with private money, that's fine. But with public funds, I think every child has the right to be able to walk to a great school. I think that, I can use even this area for an example. I could take two schools 3 or 4 blocks apart, but there's a different demographic between them. And you have a second grader in this really wonderful school that is going to the washroom, and they go there to the washroom, they do what they have to do, they come back to their classroom. The other second grader goes to the washroom, there's no toilet paper, the toilet is not properly working, there's no soap in the dispenser, and no hot water. And I'm not talking about 50 years ago, I'm talking about right now. How does that affect that child? Does it make him a better learner because he doesn't have toilet tissue? Here's a child, they're in a tight, they want to go to the washroom. Remember what it was like when you were a little kid, you're embarrassed by all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Or the other child, does it make them a better learner because they have a nice washroom that they can use? So that's something called procurement. Why is it that those that are handling the procurement have not properly sourced these particular buildings or schools? And that all comes down to something called power, how that power is wielded. And it also comes down to something that some people might scoff at called social engineering. Basically saying that some people are worth more than others. And don't think that that's not part of our American consciousness, because no matter how you try to twist it, our Constitution does say that the black man is 3/5 of a person. Don't get into me about all this kind of stuff. Look, man, when you look at it, what does it say? How does it hit you? All right, anyway, so I believe in private-public partnerships. I think that there should, if you're going to have a business in my community, I believe that you should have a responsibility. Adopt a school. I went to Mayor Emanuel and to Governor Rauner, and I came to them, I said, look, of course, Ron, he don't like this. You close out all these schools, the largest massive closing of about 50 schools. There's this crazy number between 49 and 54. At one time, that's never been done in the history of America, and as far as I know, ever at one time in the entire world, in the history that we have access to. I said, now, you have companies like Google, tech giants. They're here with incredible tax incentives and tax credits. People always complain about the poor getting welfare or government subsidy. No, y'all. It is the wealthy that get the greatest government subsidies, because when they get tax credits, guess who pays the taxes? Us, all right? And again, I'm not kicking that. We're talking about fairness, okay? I said, now, in order to keep these schools every day, to maintain these closed schools, it's $1 million a day to maintain these closed schools. What do you mean, Livingston? I don't understand it. Well, if you understand a building in weather like this, you can't have the pipes freezing up and all these different things. There's all kind of things that go on that you have to maintain for these places, not just to go totally to pot, And so I said, why don't we do this? Let's turn these school buildings into 21st century digital training centers. Let's get the Googles and the other tech giants and all that to say, okay, we're going to train coding, computer, this, that, and the other, and then guess what? You got to have people there that are going to clean the school. You got to have folks there that are going to do X, Y, Z. Hire them from the neighborhood, right? And let's do that. They are cash cows. If you're going to spend $400 million a year to maintain closed institutions, why not partner with a corporate entity and, instead of wasting that money, reinvest it in the people of the community? So all of a sudden, you don't have to outsource certain business to India. Inglewood becomes a little India. Lawndale becomes a little India. You know what I mean? The West Side becomes a little India. Little Leroy becomes a little Jamal Patel. I don't know, But I'm just saying. I'm sorry.
No,
but, yeah.
Zuckerberg. That's a good one. Yeah.
What do you call it?
Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg. Yeah. Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah. That guy. Was it my book?
Facebook.
Okay. All right.
My book.
Okay. And so, but just creative ideas like that we utilize these things, because when you close the schools, you destabilize the neighborhood immediately. And can I just add this? The reason I say that, one time we had a young man, the school had called me and everything, and they said, look, can you help us with this young man, And they had him with the psychs, psych people and all the counselors. And this young man, he was always mean, mugging, you know what I mean, and wouldn't raise his hand, wouldn't participate in the class and all that. And most of the teachers, they meant well, but they really had no boots on the ground experience for kids like this. Mm-hmm. And so then when we did a little background, we found out that the kid, he was about 13, he and his family were living, they were squatting in a condemned house. Mm-hmm. And so the reason that he didn't talk in class, because he didn't have toothpaste or a toothbrush, and he's 13, and mouthwash. Mm-hmm. So he kept his mouth shut and looked mean to keep everybody up off him, because if he had started talking and they saw his teeth and smelled his breath, you know how kids are, they would have never let up off of him. Mm-hmm. He didn't raise his hand because he's going through puberty. Mm-hmm. He ain't got no deodorant. Mm-hmm. And they would think it was all of these psych things. And we got the boy some toiletries. And guess what? He was like a great kid. He was participating. I wish there were some adults like that. Don't open your mouth. Keep your arm down. You know what I'm saying? Wash up, sponge off, do something. Anyway, so I'm I'm sorry.
No, it's not. It's true.
But what I'm saying is, but then you got to have people in the neighborhood that have relationships with people in the neighborhood that understand what some of these kids are going through.
Absolutely.
that really transcend what that are in a book. Because some of the things are that simple. If the only stores, and there's been studies on this, of course, right? They're selling them pop and now laters and Chico sticks. Maybe I'm getting too old with y'all and talking about Chico sticks
I remember
and all that, you know. And then they go to class and you say, Johnny won't sit still. No, Johnny ain't gonna sit still. He high. Off sugar.
Yep.
And so, you know, we did a thing where we asked the stores not to open up until after the kids were in school. Because it's just as simple as that. But if you got somebody that doesn't love the people enough, doesn't care about them, doesn't have the compassion, well, the kids are just going to go through this vicious cycle. Then they're going to get labeled. Learning disabled, ED, emotionally disabled, EMH is the old term, educable mentally handicapped. All these things are happening when all the kid needs is just somebody that got, mama says, a mother with some common sense to say, oh, wait a minute, little Johnny, little Susie, okay, and everything. I'm dating myself. Little Jamal, little Shaquanda, they need some help. Why y'all looking funny like that? Yeah, stop it.
Shaquanda's my cousin. Did you know?
No, I didn't. I didn't know that. But I have met her. I might have met your sister, your cousin. Okay, I'm gonna leave that alone.
So you guys, we're gonna go ahead. I know I said that was my last question, but because the conversation definitely was one that was helpful, I definitely have another question that segues off of the conversation we just had. And so when you talked about this social engineering, it's really something that bothers me personally because I think that hearing some of the stats are disheartening. But I've thought that we have to turn around how we think about them. And so I'll tell you some stats that I've heard that have made me uncomfortable and how we could possibly look at them a little bit differently to process them better. So one of them that I heard in a law school class was that if you want to kill somebody, you should kill a black woman because a black woman has the least amount of worth and life is valued the least. And so you would probably have a better chance at getting a lesser sentence if you kill a black woman versus someone who is of more higher value than a black woman. And then the second one I heard from Dee Marshall, who's here on Periscope. She does Girlfriends Pray, and I follow her. She said that the net worth of a white woman between 35 and 46 is typically around $45,000. On the other hand, the net worth of a black woman is unbelievably $5 compared to that $46,000 that the white woman's net worth is. And so when I heard this, it was very, very challenging for me to process that. It was almost as if, because this happened to me when I was a young girl. I said I wanted to go to law school, and this guy that grew up in the community with me, we're still good friends, but I always tease him about it because he told me I looked like a secretary. He said I didn't look like a lawyer because lawyers were white men. And so I could compare how I felt then hearing that as a child to how I felt when I heard these stats about the differences in net worth. And it almost made me feel like, well, if there's no hope, why keep trying to be great? Why keep trying to be successful? If there's no hope because my skin color is going to be a barrier to success for me, then why should I keep trying? But then I thought about it more and I realized that there's a young girl that was in the position that I was in, and as I continue to matriculate through law school, I'm setting an example for her. I'm sure that you're setting an example for some young boys who probably only may see someone who's a rapper or someone who's a basketball player or perhaps someone that's a drug dealer that has money, and so they think that those are the opportunities and options that are available to them. But by you being a black man and being in this position that you are in and having achieved the things that you have, you are reversing that and countering that negativity. And so I just thank you for serving as an example to the men in our community and the young boys in in our community. And that's how we start to see change, by seeing that we do have greatness and we do have great people within our race who have a net worth that's far more than $5. It's some savvy black women out here, and we are the largest group of entrepreneurs right now. And so that's why I think that it's very important that we continue in the PowBiz movement with inspiring entrepreneurs and helping them by providing them with resources and tools that they can use to advance themselves in business. And so I'm going to go ahead into another question relative to entrepreneurship that I had, and this is going to be, I think my official last question. And so I want to talk to you about you kind of mentioned the money that's made off the poor tax, we call it, right? And so I do a lot of talking about Financial Fridays with Sandra Meadows, Financial Fitness Fridays on Facebook Live. I've talked extensively with Mr. George Howard of Financial Freedom University about the disparity in income, the disparity in wealth, the gap that we see among black people versus other races, and how we can have some type of economic revitalization brought to our community through different programs, alliances, collaborations, initiatives. What is it that we need to do to move ourselves forward? And so while we have an influx of entrepreneurs, what is it that you think that we can complement that influx with to make sure that we're bringing businesses to the community, these businesses are staying in the community, and that these businesses are connected to each other to be support to each other as we continue to grow and see positive change within the ward?
Let me share a story with you. When we had the financial collapse, I used to work for a little firm just for a little while called Bear Stearns, right? An investment bank and stuff. But when the financial collapse hit, some of the great names on Wall Street went down, like Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, and the like. Anyway, from whatever stuff I've been involved in and doing, so the TARP funds came out, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, with about $720 billion. So I had some people that we connected with. The Bank of New York was the custodian in terms of how that money would be dispensed, $720 billion. And so went to New York, but went to New York with this, because here was the problem. There was an attack in Mumbai at some financial institutions and banks, Mumbai and India. And these places were attacked because they were the ones that were doing the business with the money. So they were attacked. And so we said, there are all kind of minority, women, black, whatever, accountants and asset managers and all that could handle this money. Why wasn't any of this money directed to Americans here, right? And so I learned something. When you mess with people's money, man, I tell you, that's trouble. They said to Malcolm X, get your hand out my pocket, right? And so in looking at that and saying, wow, here's money that could change, you get a company like JP Morgan, or something, and they get part of that money and they make $200 million in fees, right? I mean, $200 million in fees. Let me just say this, if I can just throw this in.
Sure.
One of the things that people have been talking to me in terms of my platform and things that I would push for and do is this financial transaction tax. Chicago has its own Wall Street called LaSalle Street. And do you realize, do you have an idea of the number of dollars that goes through LaSalle Street every year?
I don't have an idea, but I bet it's big. Let me know.
You think billions, trillions?
I think billions.
Billions?
It's trillions?
It's quadrillion. It's a quadrillion number of dollars that goes through LaSalle Street every year. That's 18 zeros. 18 zeros, a quadrillion dollars. When you buy something, do you pay taxes? Do you pay taxes for your gas?
Absolutely.
You pay taxes for your soda, for your clothing?
Absolutely.
There is not one single tax on any transaction that goes through LaSalle Street. So now, yes. So now what I'm proposing is that we add $1 on the buy side and $1 on the sell side, all right? Just in order that we can fund, things in this city. A quadrillion dollars, 18 zeros. And so in terms of What was your question again?
My question was actually about money to be made off the poor and making sure that businesses have access to resources that are available to help them not only to come into the ward, but also to sustain themselves, to sustain their business when they do come into the ward.
Okay, because I was thinking about all the ways that we can fund things, F-U-N-D, that are not being done that can make a difference. Because it's expensive to be poor.
Absolutely.
You pay more for your money, right?
Absolutely.
You pay more for your food. You pay more for these things. It's expensive to be poor. And so there are other ways of doing these things, other ways of balancing things out that can make a huge difference. And so we really have to, who do you hear talking about a financial exchange tax? I mean, who do you hear talking about saying, you know what, one of the things I'm proposing as well, is that, we have amusement taxes, luxury taxes. But you go to a Bears football game, you go and pay $10 for a hot dog. That's not how much you pay for a hot dog in real life. So the thing is, so I'm talking about a sports tax that instead of you making 1,000%, just make 900%. And then that money goes into, let's say, a couple of ways. One, into developing an entrepreneur's fund to help people get seed money to do businesses and the like. The other thing is to build trade schools, trade institutes, trade centers. Because I tell kids all the time, I said, look, if you get sick, you want to go to the doctor. But I bet you, if your toilet gets stopped up the same time you get sick, you're going to call the plumber before you go to the doctor. You say, well, let me use, grandmama say, pull some Jack Henry into this, and then mix it with some this and that, and drink that, I'll do that. Well, that toilet is stopped up, so then it costs, the plumber's gonna charge you a trip fee to come out to your house, and then to work on your toilet, and then for parts and all the other kind of stuff. You have many millionaire plumbers that have businesses. Why? Because if you're gonna sell something, it's okay to be idealistic, but sell something that people buy. You know what I mean? You learn a trade, if you're an electrician, whatever it is, and you get with the right people where you know how to apply your trade and to market yourself and to promote yourself, you're gonna make buku dollars. Absolutely. You can make money with your brain and your hands, or your brain or your hands. So, I don't think every young person has to go to college. But I do want to give them the opportunity to use the gifted hands that they have, because we need those things.
Absolutely.
We need them. So the reason I went to the financial transaction tax and some other stuff is this is how we can fund some of these things without it being any great weight on anybody.
Absolutely. You know what, you mentioned about having access to college and that not every child necessarily needs to go to college, and that definitely made me think about my experience with going away to school as well as going away to law school. And so while I do agree with that statement, I do agree that every child does not necessarily have to go to college, because I actually looked up the richest, the wealthiest people, and I come to find out that most of them have not went to college. I looked up the most successful attorneys, come to find out most of them didn't go to Ivy League law schools, right?
You see that 95% of the billionaires in the UK, many of them never finished high school?
Wow, that's an interesting fact. I didn't know that. And what I'll say to that is that I remember when I wanted to go to Dillard University in New Orleans after completing my education at Kenwood Academy. And I didn't have enough money to go, and my mom, who is very enterprising, she said, we're gonna sell dinners on 47th and Cottage Grove.
There you go.
And so we sold dinners, we sold nachos, we sold icy cups, and we had all this stuff out there. And so I thought about it, and I said to myself, because I used to be an avid supporter of Tip Top Nails, and I'll tell you all how that story segs into this. And so I thought about it, and I said, wow, I worked at UPS, I went to school, and I got my nails done every 2 weeks at Tip Tops, right? And so now Tip Tops now, I guess about 10 years roughly, y'all know I'm still a little young, so maybe 10 years roughly, around that time frame, right? Tip Tops now has about 4 or 5 locations up and down 79th Street. Their children are not having to sell chicken dinners on the intersection of 47 to go to school, clearly. Their children are not having to set up GoFundMe accounts so that they can get the money to go to law school, because they have the system set in place to establish wealth, which transfers legacy wealth, legacy inheritance. And so I would definitely think that a lot of what we have, problems that we have relative to keeping the money in the community, is because we have to change our mindset about what real wealth is and how it can be used to improve the masses. And when I talk about the masses being improved, I talk about access to health care, access to education, because you may not want to go to college, but in the event that you do, you should have the opportunity to do so. And when it came down to me not having the money to go to college, I went to everybody in the community, from Operation Push to the Bronzeville Chamber of Commerce. I went to everybody and said, hey, how do I go to school? How do I make this a reality for me? And I know that some students are shy to ask for that support, to ask for that help. And so that's why I came about with the Dream Deferred campaign, because education is definitely a powerful tool. I learned that from my pastor, the late Bishop Arthur M. Brazier, who always told us that without education, the doors of opportunity are locked and closed forever. I do not think that he meant institutionalized formal education, but just education in and of itself, the access to information, whether we educate ourselves or whether we go through a formal route of being educated and receiving a degree. And so I think that's definitely a great close out to this awesome interview. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to sit down and talk with you. So before I leave you, I'm going to leave you with two things that my grandmother says, because you touched on them and it made me think about her. And she's definitely a huge supporter of me, and also just an awesome rock star of a person. And so one of the things that you said about the plumber, you called a plumber and the plumber's going to give you a high bill, right? Not necessarily, because my grandmother has a trick that works, and I'll let you know what that is. It's the vinegar and the baking soda, you guys. You put the baking soda down and you add the vinegar to it, and it'll unclog your drain, and you can save yourself that money, because you know the Power Biz movement is about saving money as well as investing and making it. So that's a tip on how you can avoid that plumber bill, right? And I'll leave you with something else that she told me, and I can't give you everything because I am writing a book based on my grandmother's sayings, and she has a lot of them, and most of them are very funny, but all of them are very much so filled with wisdom. And so I'll give you another one before I leave. It's don't take any wooden nickels, and I want to leave you with that. Don't take any wooden nickels, you guys, because there are people, places, and things that are not as real as they seem, and we want to make sure that we investigate and get to the authenticity, the core of it. But I'm thankful today that you are a very real person, a candidate that is for the people. And so thank you for taking the time to sit with us today. Thank you for being so generous as to have us to come in this late and share your time with us. I appreciate you, and I thank you for your commitment to the 4th Ward. And I want to tell you in advance that I wish you a well campaign, a victorious campaign in your candidacy for the 4th Ward Alderman seat. Thank you so much for joining us in this broadcast. We do have some people behind us who have been super supportive, and so before I get out of here, I want to just acknowledge those people who have helped us to stream this interview here. We have Father and Daughter Productions, who's always on point with the professionalism. They're awesome with regard to the quality of the content that they're able to produce for us. Court Walk Media has been a long-time supporter of the Power Biz movement, and we're extremely thankful for their support and for their help in making this production possible. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Danielle is on my mind. Danielle Winningham is on my mind, you guys, because I've been listening to a lot of her tapes to help me level up in business. But I do want to pay tribute to my MUA, you guys. I have an official MUA now. It's hard to envision that, but I guess in growing up, you have to get somebody to do some things for you that you might not be capable of doing so well yourself. So shout out to Miss Donita Monroe, you guys. She's the makeup artist for today's premiere of the Work campaign, the video and photography shoot. This is part 2 of that, you guys, and she provided us the makeup services. So we're extremely thankful to her, her brand, and her people for supporting us and coming through to help us bring out the beauty within us. I also want to thank the photographer who's here, you guys, Melanie Brown. If you don't know her, you need to. Everybody knows her because she's all around taking photographs and capturing the memories that you create. And so thank you to all of these people who have taken the time to help us with this production and with this eventful and successful day. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the people from my planning committee for this year's conference who have come in support of this event, who were at our meetup early. Shout out to Makita Smith. Shout out to the Link LinkedIn professor. And I also have a latecomer with us, but it's okay because he is conquering the world. He's quite the celebrity. He stopped by the Pal Biz event today, Mr. George Howard himself. I know you guys know George Howard, and if you don't, then you've missed out something in these Periscope streets. And so I implore you to follow him at 6 Steps to 6 Figures. He was at my conference last year as an attendee, but he will be at the conference next year as a presenter. Yes, that's an official announcement that he will be at the Pal Biz conference, you guys. He just needs to sign that contract on the dotted line. And so I'm gonna go, you guys, so that we can take care of some more of the business. It's a late night work night, and so I wanna let you guys go as well because I know you're being super productive on this evening. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for your continued support of the Pal Biz movement. This has been another Pal Biz official broadcast. My name is Andrea M. Thompson, and it's always a pleasure to be live with you guys. Have an amazing, productive, powerful, and positive evening. I'm so glad that we got to spend this time together. I wish you much success and a victorious final ending to your campaign for the seat of the 4th Ward Aldermanic office. Have a great and productive evening.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you as well. Bye-bye, you guys. Thank you for tuning in.